Welcome back, guys. My name is Parky, and we'll just be looking at another March of the Machine set review for the red cards this time. So the way these work is I'll be looking at the mana value for the cards, and I'll be ranking those cards in each mana value to see what's going to fill out your mana curve. This is going to be a strictly limited format review. So we'll be taking a look at all the cards that you can draft and that you can pick up in your sealed events. And we'll get started here with the red color pairings just to kind of run through what's going to be happening. So in Boros, we've got backup aggro, which I'll go over once we touch base. Actually, red has quite a few of the new mechanics, or I guess returning mechanics. So we also have Izzet, which is going to be our Convoke. We have Rakdos, which is our Sacrifice. And then we've got our green-red battles. So let's start off with our 1-drops here. So we have Beamtown Beatstick, a 1-mana artifact equipment, and when it equips, it gives a creature +1/+0 and has menace. And then whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or a battle, create a treasure token equipped to. It's a cheap one. It does allow you to get a little evasion, maybe a little bit of ramp, so I could see this maybe working out, but only in the very specific decks that, have the creatures that need that buff, whether it's first strike, double strike, or something like that, or maybe even flyers, but honestly, it's not going to fit because this is a limited format. You typically don't see equipments being too relevant. Anyways, over to the Aki Scrap Chomper. So 1 mana, 1/1 creature, Phyrexian Goblin. It's pay 2 and tap, sacrifice an artifact or land and draw a card. So not too bad. It's going to allow you to kind of cycle basically through your lands after you play them. But that's about it. On to our first legend in the set. So each pack, I believe, has a 25% chance of having one of these legends that you can pick up. So this is pretty cool. I'll always have these outlined in a yellow glow. So this is Ragavan Nimble Pilfer, 1 mana 2/1 legendary creature. When it deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token and exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card. And then it has Dash, where you can play it. It gains haste, and then you return it from the battlefield to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So basically comes out, hits them, and goes back to your hand. So honestly, a really good rate for a 1-drop. And then if you want to get some early damage in on turn 2, you just hold it up and play it out and then keep it in your hand. So pretty cool there. So on to our first battle for our 2-drops. I'll first go through how battles work. Is you'll play them down, and they'll go down on your opponent's side, and they have the ability to defend it while you want to attack it and deal damage to it. If you deal enough damage to defeat it, to drop its defense counters down, then it exiles itself and then transforms onto your battlefield, and you get that effect. Now, most of these also come in with an effect, so there is an immediate upside to it, but it does replace you playing a body down instead. So it's an interesting concept, but this one is Invasion of Mercadia, 2 mana with 4 defense counters, and when it ETBs, you may discard a card and you draw 2 cards. And then once it flips, after the 4 damage is dealt, you get Kirin Flameright, a 3/3 creature. When you pay 3 and tap, you discard a card and create 2 1/1 blue and red elemental creature tokens. And creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste. So really strong ability there if you need a finisher. And honestly, you can just give a powerful creature haste if you really need to. So I really like the flexibility there, but honestly, the first side doesn't do enough, and the fact that it's a 4 defense points, and then you also now have to flip it, and then you have to discard a card. It just seems like it's going to take too long for this to do what you want it to do. So I'm really kind of being tough on these battles at first, because you're going to want to get some value out of those cards. So anyways, I'll move on. We'll go to Pyretic Prankster, 2 mana 2/1 creature. Our first transform card, so basically you pay the cost and you can transform it at sorcery speed. This one is 3 and a black Phyrexian mana, and it'll transform into Glistering Goremonger, a 3/2 creature. When it dies, each opponent sacrifices an artifact or creature. So same sort of thing. It takes too long to get it to the point where it's relevant, and then I guess if it dies, they can sacrifice a creature, but they might just have a treasure token down or an incubator token down or something like that in this set. So there's a lot of ways that they won't be sacrificing a creature, and it's not worth paying 4 mana or even 3 and 2 life for, in my perspective, so not much to see here. Next is Thrashing Frontliner, 2 mana, 2/2 creature, trample, and whenever Thrasher attacks a battle, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn. So not too bad, I suppose, for a 2-drop, especially considering it has trample too. But then again, how often are you going to be battling or attacking battles? I suppose in certain decks, maybe more often than not, but I don't see this having much relevance. Other than that, it doesn't get a buff when it blocks at all. Like if you were defending a battle, that would be cool too, but it doesn't do that, so I'm going to have to say this is probably one of the weaker 2-drops. Next is Rowls and Reinforcements, a 2 mana sorcery, just create 2 1/1 blue and red elemental creature tokens. So not much to go into on that, just it's okay, but it's nothing special. And then we have Ren's Resolve, 2 mana sorcery, exile the top 2 cards of your library until end of turn. End of your next turn, you may play those cards. So this is one of those things where it just gets you going a little bit more. These are always main deckable in limited, whether you just have one in every red deck, which is perfect, just because card draw sometimes isn't very accessible in red. So this just gets a bump up for that reason on its own. On to our second battle, we've got Invasion of Tarkir, 2 mana, 5 defense counter battle. And when ETBs reveal any number of dragon cards from your hand, when you do, Invasion of Tarkir deals X damage plus 2 damage to any other target, where X is the number of cards revealed this way. So minimum 2 damage dealt to something, and then if you reveal more dragons, then you get to deal extra damage, which is pretty cool. There are I wouldn't say quite a few dragons, but there's a decent number. I think I forget how many I counted, but I'm pretty sure there were 4 or 5, but it depends on what is accessible. But once this flips, it becomes a 4/4 flying trample dragon you control, flying trample. Whenever a dragon you control attacks, it deals 2 damage to any target, which is really strong. And this can eventually do quite a bit of damage. So Defiant Thundermaw is pretty solid. Furnace Gremlin, 2 mana 1/2 creature, pay 2, and it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. When it dies, incubate X, where X is its power. So you could honestly pump this up, 2, 3, 4 times, depending on how late in the game it is. And then if it dies, you get to replace it, and they probably have to block and kill one of their own creatures. So I would say that's pretty solid. Next is Trailblazing Historian, 2 mana, 1/3 creature with haste, and then it can tap to give other creatures haste until end of turn. So very relevant in most sets, and this creature doesn't need to do anything else other than just tap it. So a lot of your big creatures that come down later on, they can just attack right in, which for aggressive style decks, that's exactly what you want. Next is Bloodfeathered Phoenix, 2 mana, 2/2 creature, flying, and can't block. Whenever an instance or sorcery spell you control deals damage to an opponent or battle, you may pay an additional mountain. If you do, return this creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until end of turn. So really, really cool there. You basically just get a flyer back out of your graveyard whenever you just pay an additional mana, and there's a lot of cheap damage spells out there. So I think this card is going to be a very bothersome 2-drop. Next is Axeguard Artisan, 2 mana, 2/1 creature. Whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on this creature for the first time each turn, create a treasure token. So especially in the backup style decks where creatures can come into the battlefield, drop a +1/+1 counter on something else, It's very relevant. So this also gives you ramp in red, which is very, very rare. And I think that's going to help out red a lot if you have this in your 2-drop spot. Next is Kenra Spell Spear, 2 mana 2/2 creature, trample, prowess. So whenever you cast non-creature spells, gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And then it has transform, pay 3 and a blue Phyrexian mana. And then it turns into Ataxian Spellstalker, a 3/3 creature, trample, ward 2, and double prowess, which is insane because I don't think I've ever seen double prowess before. But you play one instant or sorcery spell, and that becomes a 5/5, which is crazy. And it's got ward 2, trample, like all these things on top of each other. This card's going to be fantastic. On to our red 3-drops, we have Karsus Deathguard, 3 mana 4/3 creature, defender, and as long as it has a power of 5 or greater, it can't attack as though it didn't have defender. So right off the bat, it's going to be an okay blocker as a 3 mana creature, but usually when that comes down and the opponent plays then a 4 mana creature right after, it's not going to be blocking. So you would have to be able to put a +1/+1 counter on this for it to be relevant. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot better options in your 3-drop spot. Next is Marauding Dreadship, 3 mana 4/1 artifact vehicle with haste. Then ETBs, incubate 2. So it's our first time seeing incubate. So when you incubate 2, you create the incubator token with the number of counters based on the number beside incubate. And then you can pay 2 to transform that artifact, and it turns it into a Phyrexian artifact creature. Now, an important thing to note is if it sits on the battlefield for a turn and you pay for it the next turn, it doesn't have summoning sickness because it already sat on the battlefield. So keep that in mind. And then you also have Crew 2. So Crew 2 is not too bad for a 4/1, but it does give you an additional body. I just don't know how this is going to play out just because it's a vehicle in a set that doesn't really synergize with vehicles a whole lot. So we'll see there. Next, we have another Legends creature. We have Valduk, Keeper of Flame, 3 mana 3/2 legendary creature. At the beginning of combat, on your turn, for each aura and equipment attached to it, create a 3/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste. Exile those tokens at the beginning of the next end step. So there's a really high upside here, but in most decks that you're going to play, you're not going to be playing a lot of auras or equipments. If you find this early on, and I suppose you have other synergies that are going on, maybe you want to pick up a couple and run it just for the value. So I'm not sure if this card has a very high ceiling, but it definitely has a low floor. It's a 3 mana 3/2. Next is Furnace Reigns, 3 mana sorcery with gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature until end of turn. It gains haste, and whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, create a treasure token. So this is kind of one of your simple grab and go kind of cards where you just want to take their creature and most likely sack it if you're playing Rakdos, but it's the only deck. You'll see some people try to run this. The fact that it's an uncommon card, it's going to be hard to run that in the format. But if you can get 2 or 3 of them, I'm sure not many other decks are going to be playing it. So you have a higher likelihood to find them if you're lucky. But I would say if you're going to be running that, you may as well grab 2 or 3 of them and make real use of it in a sacrifice deck. Next is Harried Artisan, 3 mana 2/3 creature, haste and transform for 3 and a white Phyrexia mana. And it transforms into Phyrexian Skyflare, which is a 3/4 flying haste creature. So really good value there, honestly, for you go from a 2/3 haste creature that can deal damage, then you can just transform it the next turn, and you have a flyer that not only can do quite a bit, but you don't even need to transform it right off the bat. If you can get damage in first off, then you may as well build up your board and then transform it when you need to. So I like how this can kind of work with the flow of your hand if it needs to, and I think this card's going to be great. On to Into the Fire, 3 mana sorcery, choose 1. Into the Fire deals 2 damage to each creature, planeswalker, and battle, and put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many +1. I'm going to be focusing on the second part. For this part, I have an interaction and removal portion of the video. So I'm just going to look at that bottom part, which has great value. You can discard a couple of lands, maybe 2 or 3, and you can pick up maybe a fourth. You can pick up a fourth card or something, and you can hear my cat meowing in the background. But yeah, no, it seems like a pretty solid card. Like, you're not going to be mad about playing it, but maybe you don't have room for it sometimes. On to Captain Lannery Storm, 3 mana, 2/2 legendary creature. So another one of our rare cards to get in a set. But this has haste, and whenever it attacks, create a treasure token. So it doesn't need to deal damage, which is great. And then you can sack that treasure token immediately if you wanted to, and give it +1/+0 until end of turn. And you could build these tokens up after a while. Maybe you already have a couple out, so I think that's pretty good. On to Squeeze the Immortal, 3 mana, 2/1 legendary creature, and you can cast it from your graveyard or from exile, so it just continues to come back. So you know this card's going to be great. Like, you'll always have something to play once it's gone from the battlefield. Next is Voldaren Thrillseeker, a 3 mana, 1/1 creature with backup 2, so instead of having the typical backup 1 that most creatures have, you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature and give them the ability on this card, or I can make itself a 3/3. So there's really no downfall to this card, but it does have the pay 1, sacrifice this creature, and it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So you could put it on a pretty beefy creature, and then they can just sacrifice themselves after they attack, and that would be phenomenal because you could just deal a crap ton of damage right off the bat. Or this one can just put it on itself and sacrifice itself and deal a bunch of damage. Well, 3, but still, honestly, that's going to be your floor of this card, which is pretty solid. And then lastly, we have Invasion of Regatha, 3 mana, or Regatha? I think it's Regatha. 3 mana, 5 defensive counters. And when it ETBs, deal 4 damage to any target battle or opponent and deal 1 damage up to 1 target creature. So you potentially could kill a creature, you will probably kill a battle, or you'll deal damage to your opponent, which is fantastic. So it's great there. And then on top of that, when it flips, it is a 4/4 creature with prowess, and if a non-creature source you control would deal damage to a creature, battle, or opponent, it deals that much damage +2 instead. So that has really high relevance with a lot of the things going on in this set, and I think that's going to be a crazy card to pick up, and it is only at uncommon, so I'm a big fan of that. On to 4 drops, we have Redcap Heel Slasher, 4 mana, 2/3 creature with backup 1, and it gives first strike, so it can give another creature first strike, which is fine, but I don't like the fact that it's a 3/4 first strike. It's still a pretty good blocker and attacker, but for 4 mana, I just think that there are better things than that. Next is Invasion of Karsus, 4 mana, 4 defensive counters, and then when it ETBs, it deals 3 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. So kind of a board wipe, but for red, for these type of decks that are typically not going to have very high toughness creatures, it's going to probably do worse for you than it is for your opponent. So that's why I don't really love it. And then on top of that, you have Refraction Element, 4/4 creature, ward, pay 2 life, and then whenever you cast a spell, Refractor Element deals 2 damage to each opponent. So really high ability there, but the fact that, like, you're probably not going to have any creatures to deal damage to it left to kind of flip it, I think that leaves us in a very tough position. So that's why I'm going to have this so low. Next is Scrappy Bruiser, a 4 mana 3/4 creature. Whenever a Scrappy Bruiser attacks, up to 1 target attacking creature gets +2/+0, gains trample, return that creature to its owner's hand at the end of combat. So it's an interesting ability. I'm not sure how relevant that's going to be, but I think it's pretty cool if it's synergized with a couple things, like the creature that can, or the vampire that can sack itself and deal damage based on its power. I'm not sure how much other relevance there is, but it's a pretty interesting effect. Then we have Ortheon, Hero of Lavabrink, 4 mana 3/3 legendary creature. This is a long one. Tap 1 on a mountain and its cell. Create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste. Sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery. So that's like a Fable the Mirror Breaker sort of thing. And then you have tap 6 and 3 mountain and itself. Create 5 tokens that are copies of another target creature you control. They gain haste and sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. Activate as a sorcery. So this card is going to mainly be useful if you have other creatures on the battlefield. If you don't, it's kind of useless, but let's just say you do. It's still a 3/3 for 4, and then you got to tap out and give something else this effect. So it depends, but I feel like if you're going to be playing this, it's not going to do everything that you want it to do. I'm not sure how strong this card's going to be. It's kind of hard to rate, so I'm kind of downgrading it because I feel like this doesn't have the same value that Fable of the Mirror Breaker has. It has only the end ability, which people really use the other 3 abilities of the enchantment to their advantage first off to set them up for Fable, so I feel like that kind of leaves this a little bit behind. Next we have Invasion of Kaldheim, 4 mana, 4 defense counters. And when it ETBs, exile all cards from your hand, then draw that many cards. Until the end of your next turn, you can play those cards that are exiled this way. So it has a little bit of an effect there. Not too much, to be honest, except you can do a little bit of cycling, essentially. But it does move you through your deck, so I don't mind that. And then it's the back card back side of the card that I'm really interested in, which is Pyre of the World Tree. It's an enchantment that discards a land card, and you can deal 2 damage to any target. And whenever you discard a land card, you get to exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. So essentially, in my eyes, is you can basically never flood out. And with red and how much they want to just continue to punch through, and you're going to see that there's tons of ways in red that you can just continue to punch through. This card is going to allow you to get there, and I really, really like it. On to Urabrask, the 4 mana 4/4 legendary creature. First strike, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to target opponent, and you get to add 1 mountain. And then the mountain, exile Urabrask, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. Activate only as a sorcery, and only if you've cast 3 or more instants and or sorcery spells this turn. So really interesting effect there. And then it flips to the Great Work, which is it deals 3 damage to a target opponent and each creature they control. Then you get to create 3 treasure tokens, and then you may cast any instant or sorcery spell from any graveyard. If a spell cast this way would be put into the graveyard, exile it instead. And honestly, that's kind of crazy. It's on its own, so you can use theirs and yours, and then it flips back and you can do it all over again. It's the only thing that really kind of brings this down is the fact that you have to play the 3 instants and sorceries, so you got to have a heavy amount of those in your deck. But I feel like it's something that's probably going to be a little bit easier to do outside of limited, so that's why it's kind of dropping down on my list here. Next is War Train Slasher, 4 mana, 4/3 creature with menace, and then whenever it attacks, it doubles its power until end of turn, which is kind of crazy. It becomes an 8/3 menace whenever it attacks. So that's only for 4, and that can hit like a truck. So I think this card's going to be fantastic. It's only common, and yeah, this one's going to be very deadly, and you're going to want to remove it as soon as possible. Now you can block with a 2/2 and a 1/1, I suppose, but let's say you put a counter on it. I don't know, something to buff it up, which makes it a little bit harder. And this card's crazy. So on to Zada Hedron Grinder, 4 mana 3/3 legendary creature, one of our legends. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada, copy that spell for each other creature you control that the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So that's insane on its own. If you have a bunch of, let's see, we've seen some elemental tokens. We've seen some, I don't know, there's tokens all over the place. There's knights in white. There's I don't know, but this can just pump all of your creatures up just by casting something onto Zada. So that could be extremely deadly, considering some of the interaction that you can do in this set. On to Rampaging Raptor, a 4-mana 4/4 creature, trample and haste. Pay 2 in a mountain. Rampaging Raptor gets +2/+0 until end of turn. You can play that on the first turn. It's a 7-mana 6/4 trample haste. And then whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls or a battle that player protects, which is, again, insane. So this card's going to be really, really strong. The only thing that's going to beat it, in my perspective, is one of the legends, Brask the Hidden. A 5-mana 4/4 legendary creature. All of your creatures have haste, and then creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, which completely slows them down, and you can put through so much damage that way. So it's just going to continue to add up, and I really, really enjoy that. Next is our 5+ drops. We've got Furnace Host Charger, a 6-mana 5/5 creature with haste and mountain cycling for 2. And it's an okay card. I think it's got it. It's got a home at least. You can always throw this in on your top end if you just want to have something to cycle in some mountains into your hand. And it's decent. It's not anything special though, to be honest. Next is a card that I think misses the marker. It's Shivon Branch Burner, a 7-mana 4/4 creature with Convoke, so you can tap creatures down to pay the mana cost. You can even tap a creature with that color, so for this case, a red creature for the mountains, and it's flying and haste. So you would have to tap down 3 creatures minimum for this to have the rate that you want it to have, which would be a 4-mana 4/4 flying haste. But I just don't see this having that much effect, but this is a dragon, so there's that. Next is Ramosian Greatsword, a 5-mana artifact equipment with Convoke, so obviously you can tap creatures down to pay for it, and then equip 2 creatures get +3/+1 and has Trample, and then equip 2. So I normally would rate this extremely low, easily the worst card, but the fact that you could actually tap down a couple creatures just to make another creature pretty big would be pretty solid if you needed some trample, some way to get some damage through. I like it in that perspective. And then, you could tap down 2 creatures, make it a 3-mana artifact equipment, and then you can pay the other 2 to just equip it to something. So that's kind of interesting, but I'm not sure if that hits the mark. Next is Anaki Javelineer, 5-mana 5/4 reach creature with a tap ability of it deals 2 damage to target battle or player, which is interesting. Honestly, this is going to be able to put up a good block and just sit there. This is probably going to be for your battle decks and your Izzet decks, and you're just going to want to sit there and hold up solid blockers with this. So the one thing that I don't like is that the toughness is 4, which a lot of the flyers that we've been seeing are 4 power. So you wish that it could block those and be safe, but I guess it's okay, the fact that it can tap down after protecting yourself at the end of their turn and deal damage to battles especially and players on its own is pretty solid. Then you have City on Fire, 8-mana enchantment, Convoke. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage instead. So the cost of this card is insane. But if you can get this on the battlefield, and you can just get some 2/2s out there, 1/1s, doesn't matter. You get anything out there, those things are going to pack a punch no matter what, and they're going to need to remove this. So this is a really fun card to play with. I would definitely play with it, and I think this could have a lot higher ceiling than I'm thinking of. Next is Crag Smasher Yeti, 6-mana 4/2 creature with mountain cycling and backup 2, and then trample. So quite a bit going on with it. It's a 6-mana 6/4 trample if you put it on itself, and then you can put it on something else, and that would become a +2/+2 trample creature, which is insane. So I like this because this is what you want out of a mountain cycling card. This is something that has a really strong ability, and then on top of that, it also has that ability early game to just discard it to get your fixing. So really, really solid too. Now we're looking at Fearless Scald, 5 mana, 3/2 creature with backup 1, and double strike. So not only are you going to have a solid creature for the backup 1, but the fact that you can give something else double strike is crazy. The fact that you can make this a 4/3 double strike is crazy. Just for 5, this card's going to be really, really strong. And I hope to draft it every time I'm playing red. Then we have Chandra Hope's Beacon, 6 mana, 5 loyalty legendary planeswalker. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability triggers only once each turn, which is really, really solid. And then you have +2 is add 2 mana in any color combination, which this set has a ton of splashing and tricolor cards and quad color cards and a bunch of that sort of stuff. So this can fix you right off the bat. And then it has a card draw effect where essentially you're exiling the top 5 cards of your library, and then you can cast an instant or sorcery spell among those exiled cards until the end of your next turn, which is really good. And then it has a deal X damage to each of up to 2 targets. Just 2 targets. It can deal damage to battles, it can deal damage to players, it can deal damage to creatures. The world's your oyster with that one, and then it's -X, so you get to determine how much you want to do that with. You could do -3 right off the bat when you play it on the battlefield. You could wipe essentially 2 of their creatures off the board, which is insane, and then you can just start upticking the next turn. So I really like this card. It's gonna basically take over the board once it comes down, and yeah, it's nuts. Then we have Ateli Primal Conqueror, a 7 mana 7/7 legendary creature with trample. ETBs, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of spells from among the non-land cards exiled this way without paying their cost. This card is disgusting. Then you have Transform on top of that, where you pay 9 and a green Phyrexian mana, and it turns into Atali Primal Sickness, an 11/11 indestructible trample legendary creature, and when it deals combat damage, they get that many poison counters. So if this does damage without a blocker, you win the game. And like that's it. It's a win con. And I don't know how many people are going to be paying for the 10 mana or 9 in a Phyrexian, I guess, 2 pay 2 life. Like, oh my god, if that flips, you better have a way to kill them before they can get to that point, because you're probably going to lose. On to our interaction and removal, we have Shatter the Source, a 6 mana instant with Convoke, and then you choose one. It either deals 6 damage to target creature, planeswalker, or battle, or you can destroy target artifact. So there is a little bit of flexibility here depending on what you can do with the Convoke. I'm just looking at these Convoke cards as if you can't Convoke and you have this 6 mana card sitting in your hand and you can't do anything with it. And so I'm saying that the ceiling isn't very high with this. Now you have Searing Barb, 3 mana sorcery, deal 2 damage to any target. If it's a creature, it can't block this turn. And then Incubate 1. So it's not too bad. You've seen some deal damage stuff like that before. It's going to be pretty relevant in the set. And then you can also create an artifact. So not that the 1/1's going to be very popular with you, but it's something. But that's why it's ranked lower on the list. Then we have Mirror and Bane Splitter, a 1 mana flash artifact equipment. When it ETBs attached to target creature you control, and it gets +2/+0, and then it has equip 3. So I'm not a big fan of the equip 3, but I like the fact that equipments are flashing their way back in. I know there's a better one in black, but this seems to do something similar where you can put this on a creature that doesn't get blocked, that they might adjust their blocks for and leave a little bit of life left. Maybe you can throw this down on a trample creature, but maybe you can destroy one of their bigger creatures without having to have a stronger creature on the board at the time. So I like it for that reason. Then we have Lithomantic Barrage, a 1 mana sorcery. This spell can't be countered, and it deals 1 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and it deals 5 damage instead if it's a white and or blue target. So it's going to be kind of a sideboard card, I would feel, but it's pretty relevant, the fact that you can just deal 5 damage to that target if it's white or blue. Like, that's basically a 1 mana kill spell for 2 of the 5 colors, so that's solid. Then you have Into the Fire again, the 3 mana sorcery. Now we're going to be looking at the deal 2 damage to each creature, planeswalker, and battle. The reason why this is a little bit lower, and I realized this after I read it, that it's not just your opponent's stuff. So if your opponent has battles placed on your side of the battlefield, then you're going to be dealing damage to that also. It also hits your own creatures, your own planeswalkers. You're going to hope that this just has an effect that pays in your favor. Otherwise, it could backfire a little bit. Then we have Coming in Hot, a 1 mana instant. Target creature gets +1/+0, gains first strike until end of turn, and then you get to scry 1. And we've seen these before. They're not too bad. They're a little tricky to play around, and I enjoy them in sets because it makes people have to think about what they have to kind of work around. And it's going to be something you can easily hold up in your hand. But people probably will assume you have it, obviously, if you only have 1 mana up. So it's a decent combat trick. Next, you have Nahiri's Warcrafting, a 3 mana sorcery that deals 5 damage to target creature, planeswalker, or battle. And then it can look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the excess damage dealt this way. And you can exile one of those cards and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may play the exiled card this turn. So it has an upside for card advantage, but if you look outside of the card advantage, this spell is still pretty solid. It can easily kill any battle that you play, any planeswalker typically on the battlefield, and most creatures, so it's going to be very reliable. Next is Burning Sun's Fury, a 2 mana instant with Convoke. Up to 2 target creatures each get +2/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. So this is a sneaky one, actually. I really enjoy this because you can play 2 creatures down, depending on whatever it is. You can tap other creatures to give those creatures haste and +2/+0. And in a really sneaky way, you can throw in some damage. So I think that's pretty cool. Next, you have Stoke the Flames, a 4 mana instant, which is probably going to be your go-to removal spell in red. It has Convoke, and it deals 4 damage to any target. So you can tap down 2 creatures, and it has deal 4 damage for 2, which is really good. It's at instant speed too, so you don't even have to get rid of a blocker on your own turn. This card is going to be really good to pick up. The only thing better is Volcanic Spite. 2 mana instant, deals 3 damage to target creature, planeswalker, or battle. You may put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library, and if you do, draw a card. So I really enjoy this because you potentially could help your draws, and on top of that, it's just going to be an instant speed, deal 3 damage, which is going to really fit well in this set. So this is going to be, at least both of these cards are going to be your staple removal spells in red, and you're going to want to watch out for that. The one thing that I kind of brought up in another video is that I'm not sure how Convoke is going to work with instants that you're going to be playing, because if somebody has no mana up but they have creatures up, now you're going to have to think about, okay, technically if they have 3 creatures on the battlefield, they could have 3 mana up depending on what cards they're playing, which is an interesting concept to think about, because normally you let your guard down as soon as they're tapped out. So I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work, but it's going to be a hard thing to play around. We're just going to look now at some other information here. So we've got the average converted mana cost is 3.59, which is the second lowest, and white was the lowest at 3.35, I believe, or something like that. And so this is going to be a very aggressive color again. So they are going to be good early. You see all of the aggressive types of cards that we've seen. They have other ways of putting through damage if it's not through attacking, but even with attacking, they've got Trample, First Strike, Double Strike. They have cards that don't even need to attack to deal damage. They have Flyers, they have Menace, they have all these sort of things that are going to be really hard to protect yourself against. And so it's going to be a really strong color, in my opinion. And that's why I said there's some sneaky finishers, because they have other ways to put through damage that isn't directly through attacking. So all in all, red seems like a fun time. And if you guys enjoy these videos, please drop a like, subscribe. It really helps the channel. I'll be posting more content like this to kind of round out the rest of the colors as it goes along, but because I had a pretty busy week, it's coming out a little bit late, but that's okay because these videos are fun for me, and you guys can drop a comment down below if you guys have any suggestions, because I am not really stuck on these ideas. It's not set in stone. This is just kind of my thought at first glance as I see these cards, and it's a fun thing for me to do. So hope you guys enjoy, and I'll talk to you guys later.